and I am the Executive Director of Texas Health and Environment Alliance. And tonight we will be talking about some more recent updates for the communities of Greater Fifth Ward. A reminder for some housekeeping items. We will have the first portion of this strictly on the webinar, and then at the end of the presentation, we will open it up for community dialogue. I strongly encourage you to provide us with feedback, your questions, your concerns. Remember, those of you from Greater Fifth Ward, we're talking about your community, right? So we need to be hearing from you, and I strongly encourage your participation, and we'll open that up towards the end of the presentation. And then I just ask that you are respectful of others. We all are here giving our time to hear about the community and the latest updates and see how we can all be a part of the greater good. So I will do my best to keep this all under 1 hour and be respectful of your time. Our mission at THEA, I see we have a lot of new folks that were registered for today. So if you're not familiar with our work, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We're working in 3 large communities across Harris County. And our mission is to protect public health and the environment from the harmful effects of toxic waste. All right, so I wanted to get started tonight showing you this map. Now, this is a graphic that the Houston Chronicle put together for a previous article they wrote about the Union Pacific creosote contamination in the Fifth Ward, Kashmere Gardens area. And I want to direct your attention to the area here on the map that you see with that blue-gray tone over it. That indicates, the larger area indicates a plume of contamination underground from the rail yard there. It's creosote, and that contains, sometimes it can contain areas of up to 1,000 different contaminants. And so it's a pretty complex mixture there that's underground in the underground system. And then there's 2 smaller areas that you'll see just to the left of that. So the area that we're going to be talking about throughout this presentation, for the most part, is this part just to the right of Lavender Street. So we're going to be talking about the City of Houston's vapor testing. And that took place really in this area here to the right or the east of Solo and Lavender. And so I know y'all from the community are very familiar with this area and readily know the area between Solo and Lockwood. And there's over 100 homes that sit above this plume. And that's the plot of the neighborhood we're going to be talking about. All right, so the City of Houston conducted soil vapor sampling in November. This test you've probably, or this sampling event you've probably heard us talk about for quite some time, because it was supposed to take place much sooner, but because of the pandemic, it wasn't able to take place until November of 2020. And they tested for different groups of chemicals and different chemicals individually. We'll look at a list here in a minute. But in total, there were over 35 different compounds that they looked for in the vapor or gas form. And so the photo you see here on the left is a photo from the entity who did the sampling. And basically, they insert these passive gas soil samplers into the ground and they monitor for 2 weeks. And so they did this in, a planned out area spatially that is above the creosote plume that I just referenced in the previous map. So, why 2 weeks, right? So one of the things that's important to understand about the way these chemicals act, and especially the way that they act when they're coming up underneath our surface and potentially into our air, is that they can change levels. It can change the levels that gases are being emitted potentially from the plume of contamination through the ground, and then also through the air. This can change on an hourly basis, a daily basis, and it undoubtedly changes seasonally. You would expect there to be higher, releases of these gases in the warmer months. And so the data we have is from the November sampling event. This data that we're going to talk about today was strictly, like you see here, retrieved from the underground monitors. It does not indicate what the outdoor air quality is like or the indoor air quality. So there's still a lot of unknowns, but this is a step in the right direction. So I'm excited to finally be able to talk with y'all about this. As I mentioned, there's a long list of different chemicals and chemical compounds that they were looking for in the vapor form. And so some here that you might be more familiar with than some of these really long technical names. You might recognize ones like xylene, toluene, benzene, chloroform, vinyl chloride. These are some of the kind of more well-known contaminants on this list from your everyday person, especially living in the Houston area. It's not uncommon for us to hear about, a benzene release at an industrial facility or these types of contaminants in our environment from industrial practices. So some of them, though, are a little less common, but at the end of the day, my understanding is that all of these can be associated with creosote. Okay, so I want to read to you an excerpt from TCEQ from 2004, right? It's 2021. So let's go back to '04. So this excerpt says, recent evidence suggests that unacceptable indoor air concentrations are more common in structures above groundwater with volatile contaminants than previously believed. This is a rapidly developing field, and reviewers are encouraged to look to the latest guidance for the appropriate guidance and scale of demonstration necessary to be reasonably certain that indoor air and structures located above and adjacent to groundwater with volatile contaminants does present unacceptable risks. So what does that mean? So basically in 2004, our state environmental entity was aware that further testing needed to be done around and above the creosote plume that was underground, that is underground still. However, that testing did not take place. So where we are today is that we're in a position where we can't say for certain what took place in the past because we don't have that information. It wasn't collected. But the information we do have today can give us a glimpse into the window of the past of what it might have been like. So it's important, that as we're looking at these environmental issues in the community and public health issues in the community, that we're understanding that we will never be able to go back and make the past whole, but we want to try to understand as best we can what has taken place, what's taking place today, right now in the community, and figure out a way to move forward to benefit and protect the community. Okay, so this infographic you're looking at here is to give you an idea, just a visual idea of a potential situation. The first two houses you're going to see here are not really applicable in our area, right? So there's the first house has a basement, the next one has that underground crawl space, and then the next one has a cement slab. we know a lot of homes in this area are pier and beam. And so that in of itself looks a little different. But what I want to direct your attention to is just the simple fact here that in this image, you have a plume, this dark brown, this dark gray area underground of contamination that is beneath a neighborhood. And that from that plume, vapors, chemical vapors, which are indicated here by the green arrows, can migrate through the subsurface upwards to the area beneath the homes or the open air. And so to better understand what is going on in this area, and I'll show you a map of this specific area in a second, the city of Houston contracted a company to place samplers strategically throughout this area. And they placed 28 samplers on 14 residential properties, and they placed 10 samplers on city rights of way. They were able to recover data for 35 of these 38 samplers that were placed out either in the private, the residential properties or the city's rights of way. And in total, throughout the 35 data points that were recovered, they were able to detect 20 plus vapors that were present in this space down here, right? So the underground space, in the vapors indicated here by these green arrows migrating up through that ground, that's what they picked up underground was over 20 different chemical vapors. So this is the area I was talking about. So throughout this area you see here on the map, these samplers were strategically placed between Solo Street and East Lockwood to the boundaries to the east and west, the boundary Lucille Street to the north, and Liberty Road to the south. So you can see here, those of you, from the community are very familiar with this area and know that there's a lot of churches in this area. It's not just residential homes, but there are absolutely homes in this area, over 100 homes. Okay, so one of the chemicals that they found that I want to direct your attention to is toluene. And they found toluene ranging from 26 to 332 nanograms for 12 of those 35 samplers. So 7 of the 12 that had these levels of toluene were on the residential private properties. So I know this sounds really scary, and I'm not saying it's acceptable, but I want to make sure we're understanding the levels at which these chemicals were found. And so toluene, for example, the highest peak they found, 332 nanograms, equates to 0.332 parts per million. What does that mean? Right. So, okay, to give you a context in terms of what that means, there's an occupational exposure limit for toluene that is, say, the limit at which it is safe for one in an occupational setting to be exposed to. That's 100 part per million. So the highest level they found here was less than 1. And so 1 part per million. So when we're talking about exposure scenarios, they found very, very low levels. But you would not expect to find these in a residential area. You would not expect to find these where you go to worship. And this is toluene, right? So this is an industrial, typically an industrial contaminant. And so one other item here that might ring a bell is total petroleum hydrocarbons. They found that over 5,000 nanograms. And so when you break that down again into the parts per million, that number looks a lot smaller. It's 5.79 parts per million. So depending on what unit these items are being reported, the numbers can look really big and scary, and they might actually be a very small concentration that was detected though. So the fact alone, like I said, is you wouldn't expect to see these in a residential area. They were detected. They are at very low levels today. And we cannot say for certain what they would have been in the past, but this can indicate that they would have been higher in the past because the contamination took place. It started so long ago. These chemicals break down over time. So the map you're looking at here is one that was created by the company contracted to do the sampling, called Beacon Environmental. And so they're showing you here what they would extrapolate, or what they would predict, if you will, to be in these underground vapors if they were to connect the different sampling points that picked up on toluene specifically. So that's indicated by the blue. So within these areas were samplers that picked up toluene in the 2-week testing that took place in November. And they plot those, and then they can create this overlay in a mapping system to get an idea spatially of what might be going on underground, right? Since, it's not really reasonable to place samplers and all over every single yard. They're able to place certain ones strategically and extrapolate what the scenario could be from there. And so that's what we're looking at here. Okay, so for me, the bottom line, like I said, the contamination took place decades ago, but it's still very real and present today. And, the levels likely would have been higher, in previous decades, as this breakdown process was just beginning. The vapor levels underground and potentially in the air, as I mentioned, can vary, pretty quickly, day to day and hourly to hourly. And so that's why that 2-week testing was really important. And it would be interesting to see as well, what these levels look like, what could be detected at these locations during our warmer months. Also, really the bottom line is an exposure pathway exists today. And that's one of the items that Texas Department of State Health Services, leaned on as it not being feasible to further look into the community's health, because it said that an exposure pathway wasn't established. They were not sure if people were being exposed to different contaminants. And so this testing, though they found 20 plus chemicals in very, very low concentrations, it does show that there is a pathway, right? There is a route for items from underground, these vapors underground, to be migrating up through the ground and potentially into the outdoor air and maybe the indoor air. We can't say for certain what that looks like unless more testing is done, though. All right, so I want to talk about these different potential exposure pathways and use this infographic to walk y'all through. But I would like to go ahead and open up right now for a special guest, Rodrigo Cantu, to join us and say a few words and give you guys some really important updates. Rodrigo?
Sure. Thanks, Jackie. And thanks for doing that very comprehensive overview of the city's testing that was completed several months ago. I'm Rodrigo Cantu with Lone Star Legal Aid, environmental justice attorney representing a group called Impact that is based in the greater Fifth Ward, Cashmere Gardens area. Impact worked closely alongside the city and Beacon to get this testing done. They were instrumental in choosing the many points that Jackie talked about that were eventually chosen to be the sample locations. And when we, as impacts attorney, I got that information in December. We sent off that information to all of the individual homeowners, to let them know that their results were back, and to let them know that the exposure is there. It's in very low amounts, like Jackie was stressing. So we aren't really worried at this time that people are being exposed to dangerous levels of any of these chemicals. But like Jackie said, we know that the way that this process works is that in the past, these levels would have been higher. But of course, we can't go into the past and measure what it was like back then. But we have put these results into a series of comments to the TCQ, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, and we sent them off to them because Union Pacific is in the middle of getting their permit regarding this site. And then we also sent a similar letter to the Department of State Health Services, to DSHS, and let them know that this exposure pathway for these chemicals had been discovered, and urging them to take a closer look with regard to the cancer cluster. But the latest update that we do have for the community is that as of middle of March, so we're talking about 3 weeks ago, according to the TCQ's website, the permit that UP is in the middle of trying to get is what is called in its draft stage. The draft permit is ready. So what does that mean? That means that the TCQ and UP have arrived at a point where they like and agree that the draft permit is the final plan for this site, including the contamination that you've been hearing about for the past 20 minutes. And of course, many times before tonight's meeting. I have put in a request, what is called a public information request for that draft permit. I've actually got a whole bunch of responsive documents as of today. And I'm seeing a question from Janet Rivera. The permit is to quote unquote manage the waste on the site as well as off site underneath the residential area. So I've got that permit. I haven't even gotten a chance to go through it. I'm going to be doing that probably all next week and for the several coming weeks. But all that is to say is that the comment period right now for this permit is actually open, so anybody can submit comments. And the comment period is probably going to be open for several more months. I know that the TCQ wants to organize a public meeting where they would send their representatives and where Union Pacific would have to send its representatives. And that public meeting would be for the benefit of community members, people that live over the plume, people that live nearby, anybody who is concerned. And the idea would be that there would be a question and answer session where you as a member of the public could ask some questions of UP and of TCQ. And then in the second half of the meeting, you'd actually be able to submit comments that actually formulate a record as to whether or not you oppose the permit. And more than likely, many people do. But it still remains to be seen what exactly the technical issues are. I know that the TCEQ is coordinating with local politicians for when that meeting is going to be. Last I heard, they are honing in on the last 2 weeks of June. So we've got about 2.5 months. Once I have heard what the final date is and location, Zoom link, we will be distributing that information to the community. And another thing that my client Impact is wanting to do is to actually host a meeting ahead of that public meeting, right? So before we actually get a chance to talk to TCEQ and to Union Pacific, we want to talk to you guys, to the community members, so that we can tell you what concerns us about the permit. And again, I'm going to have to spend some time going through all these technical documents to figure out what is to be done. So for instance, we know that TCEQ has the data in front of them about this exposure pathway, but we don't know what exactly they plan to do about it. And that's what I'll be looking into. I saw that there was another question. What is this managing current waste that has been there? Or yes, and thank you for handling that, Danielle. Managing the waste is it's TCEQ and Union Pacific's way of saying what's the plan they have to ensure that the waste is not going to be a risk to people or some sort of risk to the environment. Let me scroll up a bit to see, make sure I got that whole question. Can some of the ways that they would be managing the waste be dangerous than other ways? Well, we know that one of their plans is probably to leave much of the waste in the ground, and technically the laws and the regulations allow them to do that if they are able to prove that leaving it in the ground is not going to present some sort of risk to the community. And that's what I'll be looking into over these next couple weeks, is to make sure that that is actually the case. And we know that they do plan on continuing to remove some of the DNAPL creosote, and we're going to encourage the continued removal of that DNAPL and creosote, which is what makes up the plume that you see on this map on your screen. So please be aware that you'll be getting a communication from probably a whole bunch of stakeholders, including Thea, including Lone Star Legal Aid, including my client Impact, letting you know when when the two meetings are announced. Again, we'd like to have one in May, which will be hosted by my client and myself to educate the community. And then there will be another one more than likely towards the end of June, which is actually hosted by the TCEQ. And it's their opportunity. It's actually your opportunity as a community member to hear directly from the agency and from Union Pacific about this site. I think those are the extent of my announcements, Jackie.
Awesome. Thank you, Rodrigo. That was very informative and helpful. I appreciate that. All right, folks. So let's get back to exposure pathways. Okay, so there's a lot going on here, a lot we can look at. Want to make sure that we're not understanding any inaccuracies that might be here, like these barrels. It's not uncommon to hear folks who grew up in the area talk about swimming or accessing creosote ponds or pits that, historically were not protected from people coming on the property and coming in contact with these pits. And so when we're talking about exposure, there's different ways that one in the past or potentially today could be exposed. One in the past was potential direct exposure. You hear about, and some of y'all might have these stories, coming in contact with this material. And so you have the direct contact, and then there's the potential for, the vapors coming up through the ground, potentially entering one's body through exposure outside or even indoors. There's also the potential that we need to be mindful of for when these vapors come up from the subsurface and into the outdoor air, for them to be carried by the wind. Think the ITC fire, some of these big industrial fires or flares that it's not uncommon for us living in the Houston region to see. And you can see for miles, how those release events migrate. And so thinking of that on a bit of a smaller scale though, but if these vapors were coming up and were actually black like this smoke, right, how that could come up and then migrate elsewhere. And so that's kind of that's what these arrows here throughout the air are indicating, the potential for vapors to come up from the subsurface into the outdoor air and then be taken off into a different location by the air. So I touch on that here with the considerations of the prevailing winds. My understanding is that the prevailing winds are to the north, and we know that today the community above this area is on city water, but historically many of the homes in this area had groundwater wells. So, kind of like with understanding what the vapors were like in the past, there's really no way for us to understand what the groundwater people were pulling into their homes in the past were like, or, watering their gardens with. But today, the area is on city water that does not come from the ground directly beneath this area. Um, what we're looking at here is a map of Texas Department of State Health Services cancer investigation for the area. And so I want to segue from, the potential exposure pathways into public health and an initiative that we at THEA have recently launched. So the Texas Department of State Health Services looked at the different census tracts that you see here highlighted in blue or red. Census tracts basically like a smaller geographic zone, right? And so this area is pretty large. If you look to the west or the left of this map, it is actually the heart of the city of Houston. And if you go to the east side of the blue line, that's the boundary of 610. And the census tracts here highlighted in blue were areas that the state investigated specific types of cancer, but did not find any of those specific types in elevated rates. The census tracts in red are areas where the state investigated these same specific types of cancer, which is really only a handful or two of types of cancer, and where they found at least one type of these cancers at an abnormally high rate. And when we're talking abnormally high, we're talking about a comparison to a community elsewhere in Texas and what you would expect to see in these cancer rates there. So this study, there's actually multiple studies. There's about 4 of them. The state has continued to kind of add on a little bit each time. So these studies really only look at a small window of cancer accounted for here. And I'm really concerned at the cancers that they're not looking at, some of these more common cancers with these types of exposures. And we have to be mindful that the environmental issues in this study area are complex. It's to the south, it's the heels of the ship channel. There's Superfund sites in the areas, other old, waste sites. There's a variety of environmental concerns, and so we need to be looking at a larger window of cancers. But the other concern is that, toluene, for example, we talked about earlier, exposure to toluene can be associated with impacting the central nervous system, the heart, the respiratory system, hearing, children in utero, your unborn children, but also vision. Vision is something that I thought was pretty interesting that, I've, studied environmental science and geology in college, and have been working in this space for many years now. And I saw this for the first time, and I thought it was pretty interesting that toluene has actually been associated with the loss of colored vision. And so, if that rings a bell for any of you out there, we need to be hearing from you, because there's no registry for this kind of information. But we need to be aware of what the community has experienced or is experiencing today. And in order to help kind of fill these gaps, we have a health survey that we host on our website. It is in the chat. There's a link there in the chat. And we are attempting to collect 200 health surveys from Greater Fifth Ward between now and the end of May. Then we're going to be asking Texas Department of State Health Services to assess the Texas Cancer Registry for the specific types of cancer that we are seeing come in these health studies. So why is this important? Why does this matter? Well, the Texas Cancer Registry is limited, and Department of State Health Services is limited in how they can access that database. So it doesn't work exactly like we would think. The state cannot go into this registry and say, for this area, right, this area here on the map, we want to know all types of cancer diagnosed in high rates. They can't do that. They have to go into here for this geographic area for a period of time and pull cancer type by cancer type. There's hundreds of types of cancer. So unless we know what to ask for, it might not get looked at. It could be out there in abnormally high rates, but they just might not be looking at it. And so we have to ask proactively for these things to be looked at. Also, the Texas Cancer Registry does not necessarily account for people who grew up or once lived in this area and have since left and been diagnosed with cancer. If you grew up in this area or you worked in this area and you moved off and say 10 years later you got a respiratory cancer and you lived in, let's say, San Antonio, your doctor would enter that cancer diagnosis in the Texas Cancer Registry for that zip code in, say, San Antonio, where that diagnosis was made. So it's really important for us to be hearing from you, hearing from your family members, your friends who have moved away, but may have grown up here or spent a lot of time here and have health concerns because of it. So it's a big limitation. And I know that there are many people involved with the Union Pacific site and other things in the community who have since moved off, but are still very actively involved in trying to make this community whole again. And so we definitely want to be hearing from you too. All right, so what's happening next for Thea? So please take 5 minutes of your time and take our health survey. Then over the summer, we're going to be working on our ask to Department of State Health Services. Before then, we will be having a town hall meeting on May 4th at 6 o'clock. You can register on our website, txhea.org, and our town hall meetings cover updates on all of the projects we work on, which are 3 different projects, as I mentioned, across Harris County. And so we will definitely be sure to give you the latest updates on any of the items related to these environmental and health concerns in Greater Fifth Ward. We're also working with our partners at Rice University School of Architecture to look at inequities when it comes to flooding and the proximity to industrial pollution, industrial facilities, lack of access to adequate drainage, and how that might impact communities. And one of the focus communities is Greater Fifth Ward. So we are doing a lot of work behind the scenes to get a better understanding of what community concerns are, what types of maps and information are out there, so we can compile, so the researchers at Rice can compile all of this information. And we will be presenting those maps with Rice and their researchers either in the end of May or the beginning of June. Now, I know that those of you who are on here who have tuned in to many of our presentations, you're used to seeing me give the presentation. That might look a little differently. I am planning on going out on maternity leave in early June. And anytime beyond that is a bonus. So I might be the one leading the presentation, or it might be one of my stellar team members. But nonetheless, I'm really excited for this research opportunity. And I hope that this will be a tool for the community. And so we will be presenting those findings about the inequities when it comes to flooding and industrial proximity end of May or beginning of June. And that is my presentation that I have for y'all this evening. I am going to go ahead and start working on opening this up for folks to engage. If you have a question, please feel free to, in a moment, unmute yourself or drop the question in the chat, and we will be sure to address your questions or your concerns the best that we can. So one by one, I'm unmuting the lines now if anyone would like to jump in and engage. Oops.
Okay, well, I'm just gonna jump on in here. Hey, everybody, how y'all doing today? This is
Hi.
Sandra.
Oh, hey, Miss Sandra, I did not see you on. Thank you. Yes, I was hoping to hear from you. Please,
Yeah.
take the floor.
I was on. I had a hard time getting in, but I joined. I didn't really have anything new to say or bring to the table. I like your presentation, and I'm just it's an honor to be working next to you and with you and getting this done, as well as Rodrigo, because like we say, this has gone on far too long, and if we keep on accepting this, it's not going to get better. We have to push back and fight back, because they're not going to fight for us. We have to fight for ourselves.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Absolutely. It's your community. And if you don't
Yes.
fight for it, who will?
Who will? No
Who
one.
will?
So we
Yeah.
have to stand up and quit letting them just dump on us and push back and say, no, no, we don't want that.
You bet. And y'all are the eyes and the ears. Y'all are the ones with the experience. Y'all are the ones living there on the ground that have lived there. You know, the local knowledge, Miss Sandra, that you and others in the community bring to the table is critical, right? Because at the end of the day, a lot of the people who make these decisions that affect our communities, they don't live there. So
They
they
don't
don't.
live here. They haven't never walked here. They haven't never came out here to even see the community with less more than want to come out here and throw something in it. You don't even come out here and talk to us to see if this is how we want it or what do we want. You don't ask us what do we want, but you quit to come throw something at us and think we're supposed to say, okay. No, that's enough of that. We're tired of that.
Yep. I understand, and I hear you too. I come from a community that was done to death by pollution, and we have a community member who's moving away, and I am so sad because he lives like a stone's throw from the toxic pit we deal with on the east side, and he's the eyes and the ears, and so y'all are the eyes and the ears, and it's so important, and I'm glad you could join us, Miss Sandra.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh,
Absolutely.
okay, this is Mrs. Glenn. Can you hear me?
Hi, Mrs. Glenn. Yes.
Okay. I talk to people in the community, and most of them say they do not want to leave. My nephew is special. He was born over there. He's special need. And his conversation is, Annie, if I have to move, I'm scared. He's 44, but he has a child mind. And he said he's scared to move because he wants to live still over there in my house on Lavender.
Mm.
And I can understand that when his surroundings has been over there all along. He don't know how to go out into the world and be somewhere else other than Fifth Ward. So no, I don't want them dumping nothing else over there on him. And people don't know him as him being special. You got peoples out there that would, and it's a lot of special need kids in that neighborhood. And if they leave out of that surrounding, if you ever been around them, it's not good for some of them.
Right.
And so I want them to do what they're supposed to do to take care of that neighborhood, because of some of this is caused by the creosote for
It's
all them
caused
being
by them.
special.
Exactly. The birth defects, why they're special, is
Yep.
caused by them living over here when their mothers were pregnant with them.
Yep. And we need the state to be looking into that, right? We need to be looking into birth defects. We need to be looking into, differences within, the school system and the testing there that take place there compared to communities who aren't living with this creosote.
Exactly. Right. And compare them, and they'll see that this is not normal out here.
Yes, and I understand, Mrs. Glenn. I understand, it is hard to leave your home for anybody, when it's and especially, when that's your comfort, that's all you've known. I understand. And so, if there are buyouts or there are, people calling for relocation,
Well, I'm
it's
speaking
likely
for
going to be.
all the special need kids over there, because it's a lot of them.
Oh.
And it's going to be really, well, if it's going to keep them sick, you're going to have to take them out of that situation. but it's going to be hard to take them out of that situation. Not only is there young adults that's like that. I mean, just think of people that have lived there that's got that same thought in their mind that never go no further than Fifth Ward sometime. You know, where will I go? You know, where am I going?
Better
You're
that,
right.
how they gonna survive when they get over there because they're not used to that element, so they're gonna feel secluded. I mean, you taking them out of their natural habitat, sticking them somewhere they don't really want to be. They're gonna go depressed. They're gonna get depressed.
Yeah,
And
It's
you're
I
a
right.
whole
know,
There
lot.
are things
It's
that
a
we
whole lot of factors to look into that. It's a whole lot of
Yes.
factors.
Yes, these are, things that need to be considered for sure, different needs that, if that is the case, we would need, the different entities involved would need to work on figuring out, to make the residents whole.
All right.
yeah, because I asked him to come go with me. He said, "Oh no, because I'm gonna lose my friends, and
Mm,
people don't know me out there, and they
yeah.
might try to hurt me." So that's just he really worried about him getting
That's
hurt
his
with
main
not
thing. Yeah,
knowing
he'll get hurt.
outside of Fifth.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Mrs. Glenn, uh, for for him, for friends, other relatives in the neighborhood that might have a special need, a learning disorder, or a special learning ability, really, then a health problem. Please encourage them, or someone like yourself, to fill out one of our health surveys for them, because if we can know these specific terms of what the residents are struggling with, then we can submit a request for those to be looked at, if there is a way to look at them through birth defect or school records, or if there is a way to look at it. Y'all's experiences are
Like
so important.
Lavender is a very short street.
Mhm.
And just to think of it, I had two nephews that it meets the special need. And then there's Sharon, daughter, that's 3. And the street is so short, and there were Pookie, that was 4. Um, it's just
Harvey.
been a lot. Yeah, yeah, Harvey, a lot of special need people on this one little short street.
Wow.
And don't forget Peanut and them, the people that was kin to Robo and them, all that little road down there, all
That
them
whole
was
house was special
the
need.
whole house. The whole family. How do you get a whole family special? It
Right.
just don't seem right. The whole family, and they all was born right there.
Right. Yeah. No, like, where is that normal?
Nowhere.
No.
Nowhere. And see, they make it look like it's just normal to Fifth Ward. No, that's because you brought it over there to make it look normal. It's not normal. And nowhere in the United States is that normal to have a whole community die from cancer and everybody's born with special needs. That's not normal.
Mm-mm. No. No, absolutely not. Studies, there have been some interesting studies that I've read, from other communities where they had found out that there were a high rate of women giving birth defects, and they didn't know why these women were having high rates of birth defects, and they came to find out these women were walking the perimeter of a baseball field next to their neighborhood,
Oh,
and the baseball field was built on contaminated land. So while these women were out there walking, they were being exposed to vapors that were coming up from that ground, and that baby inside of them was being exposed.
That's what happened to our neighborhood, I believe. Everybody
Yeah. Yeah. And so I see there's an item dropped here in the Q&A. And I think what you're trying to say is that when you live in a contaminated area and you're trying to fix your health, but you are still being exposed to contaminants, it's undoing all of the good that you and the doctors are trying to do. And it's hard to get completely well when you are still, getting
living in it.
exposure.
Yeah, and that's true because you're in an area. They send you home with medicine. You're thinking you're gonna get well, but you're not getting well because you're still in a contaminated area. You're still living in it. The medicine only clashing because you're steady in a bad area. You know, you're still in contamination, but you're taking medicine that's not doing you no good. So why take
Jackie, I
Why
see that
take
there's a question in the box that I'd like to answer. I see there's
Yeah.
2 questions from Janet Rivera. She's asking, what is the source of the underground contamination? And then she asked during flooding if the exposure increases substantially. So again, the source is UP's on-site creosote. So Jackie's going to the map. But at one point, they had creosoting operations on their property. Those ceased over 30 years ago. It leaked into the ground and has now moved off site underneath residential homes. That's that sort of blue blob that you see up on the screen right now. So it's UP's contamination to clean up. And I should correct, at the time it was Southern Pacific that was operating the creosote site, but UP has acquired them, so it is their responsibility to manage this waste. And then your question about if flooding increases the risk substantially. We have a expert, and she's still looking in to see if that is an issue. Because as you can imagine, when it floods, it sort of recharges the groundwater. She would expect that perhaps she would expect that before storms, there's a temperature change and there's also a pressure change. And on really hot days, like Jackie was talking about, that's when you might expect the highest levels. But we don't right now think that flooding is going to increase that exposure risk, at least not substantially. If we have reason to believe that, we will certainly communicate that to the community.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. I did miss those in the chat. Thank you.
Yes.
Well,
Yes. Hi. Hello.
yes, hi.
Hi. Yes, my name is Dr. Francis. I'm from the City Gas community. And first of all, I want to say thank you all for a very thorough and comprehensive presentation. And so my question is to you all, do you guys consider conducting a similar study in the City Gas area? And if so, what is the process of doing so?
Thank you for your question and your feedback. We appreciate it. Rodrigo, are you familiar with this area specifically?
I know one of my colleagues is working on some issues in Setagas, Carolyn Crow.
Yes.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, I grew up in City Gas, and as a matter of fact, the railroad tracks Pacific Union is maybe like 20 steps away from my childhood home. And so my father passed away of he had one lung before he passed away, and so he also had bronchitis. So I know there's a lot of people who have suffered cancer and bronchitis and things of that nature. And so we were just wondering if how we can, get involved with the process as well.
Yeah. So have you met Miss Crow, or have you spoken to Carolyn Crow?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we meet with her every other Thursday. Yes.
Okay. Well, then she probably knows. She certainly knows more about the case than I do. That's her area. So I will touch base with her and relay your concern. But essentially, we went to the city 2 years ago, and we said, look, this testing needs to be done. Union Pacific is supposed to be doing it, but they are not stepping up to the plate. And we made an ally there at the city who was then able to relay our concerns. And they are the ones who actually paid for the testing. And we worked alongside them to select the correct company, which was Beacon in this case. And then the city and Beacon worked alongside my client, some of whose members are on this call and have been speaking. they worked alongside my client to select those locations. So it was really a matter of making an ally at the city level and then doing that testing, but without knowing the specifics of your community.
Mhm.
I can't tell whether or not that's going to be successful, but I will certainly relay your concern to Miss Crow and encourage her to talk to you about that.
Okay. All right. Thank you so kindly. I appreciate it.
And what was your name again? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Yes, my Dr. Rosalind,
Rosalind.
and my last name is Rosalind, and my last name is Francis, Francis. Thank you so much.
Francis.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. Thank you both. And Rodrigo, I know you touched on earlier the permit, the documents you got from your information request, and there's a question here in the Q&A. Where is the waste going? I know when you touched on those other items, you mentioned, looking at kind of like what the options are. Has it been decided that any of it is going to be removed, or what does that look like?
So they are removing some of it, what they can. We just have to be honest. A lot of the waste is just so far underground that it literally is impossible to get to unless they were to build like a giant hole in the ground, right? More than likely, that's never going to happen. It's 99 to 1 that's going to happen. The question then becomes, okay, you're going to leave some of it in the ground. Is it a danger to anybody if you leave it in the ground? And that's largely what this testing was meant to do, was meant to see if it was a danger to anybody. And I think, as Jackie explained thoroughly at the beginning, the numbers are so low, we're not really concerned that people are being exposed to anything at a dangerous level right now. They are doing what is called DNAPL removal. Again, the plume is a creosote DNAPL plume. They have some wells out there where they're actually pumping some of the DNAPL out, some of it that they can get to, because not all of it is so far that they can't get to it. We're going to encourage them to drill more of those DNAPL removal wells, which would mean going a little bit further out and deeper than they have been going in the past. So that is one way of answering your question, which is that some of it is going to probably stay in the ground. Some of it they are removing right now. We're going to encourage that continued removal. And if your question is more about, well, what's it doing right now when it's just sitting there, it actually is moving further underground. So it's moving like further into the earth, but it's also moving a little bit to the northeast, so that we think that little blob that you see here is probably moving more towards Lockwood than where it is situated right now. But as it moves horizontally, it also moves further down vertically.
Wow. Yep. This stuff likes to migrate deeper. And it's definitely a big beast. And thank you, Rodrigo, for following this so diligently.
I have a question. Rodrigo, did you say that they were removing some of it? Because just yesterday I had a conversation with a UP employee, a guy that grew up right there in the neighborhood from little kid with us on up, and he happened to call yesterday. He said that they were removing some stuff too. He said they had dug into the ground. Really, he said they had like 100 dump trucks removing some stuff. Then they turned around and laid some tracks. But I forgot to ask him what end was that on.
He could have been referring to one of two things, more than likely. Offsite are those DNAPL removal plumes that I was just mentioning, where it's literally those DNAPL creosote wells. I said plumes, but it's wells. That's where they're actually going in once a month. They're supposed to be, and they're actually pumping some of it out of the ground.
That's what he told me, and I told him I believe it when I see it. So you do know about it.
Yes. So they submit quarterly reports to the TCEQ that specifically says which date they went out, which well they pumped from, and how much they were able to remove from that particular.
Okay. Because he told me that. I told him I hadn't seen none of that. And I ride up and down Liberty Road every day looking for a reason to call or turn them in. And he said, well, they did it mostly in the evenings, and I ain't going to ride at night. So I don't know. But he was checking it out, and I just didn't believe it.
Awesome. Like I said, the eyes and the ears.
Yeah.
Hey, Rodrigo, will you address the question there from Ronald? Thank you, Ronald, for asking your question.
Okay, I'd like to know whether the location at Lockwood and Salina would be included in this case presented. Salina, I'm gonna Google that real quick so I know what you're talking about. Okay, so it looks like it's a little further north. It looks like it's about 2 blocks north of the edge of the plume. So
Okay.
no, right now we don't think that there's any contamination in the area of the intersection of Lockwood and Salina. I hope I'm saying that right. But it may be it's moving in that direction. If I had to tell you when is it going to hit that intersection, I couldn't tell you, Mr. Ronald.
And just to give you an idea here, when it comes to the health study, that area is absolutely included in the area that the state is looking at and that we're looking at for health impacts. So that area is going to be more up here in this area. And so we definitely still, even though it's not the area directly above the plume, we definitely want to be hearing from you, regarding your health and your concerns, most certainly. And we have a question here. Which schools are included in this area of contamination? That's a fantastic question. I actually don't know all of the schools that are involved in that area. Miss Sandra or some of
Jackie,
the other.
there are no schools directly over the plume, but
Okay.
there are certainly schools within this study area on your screen. Again, this study area on your screen is the cancer cluster. And of course, there's many, many schools in there, but there are none over the plume. The one,
No, Dogan is the closest, but it's not over the plume. There's no.
No,
and also what about Fleming Middle School is a few blocks, like it looks like
It's
it's,
closer than Dogan is to the plume. Fleming is close.
yeah.
yes, it is.
Great. Okay. Great information, y'all. Awesome. Well, I promise y'all, I was going to be respectful of your time. We're a few minutes past our hour because y'all were just fabulous and engaged, and I'm so appreciative of this dialogue that we were able to have. But I'll go ahead and conclude the meeting now and say thank you to Rodrigo, Mrs. Glenn, Miss Sandra, Miss Bonta, those of you, the other folks that engaged as well. We really appreciate hearing from you and for all of you joining us tonight. And if nothing too crazy pops up between now and the beginning of May, then we will see y'all again in May. Have a good night.
All
right.
righty.
Thank
Y'all have a blessed night as well.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Rodrigo.